Hello again and welcome to another Warhammer 40k Mordy and Glory video. In today's episode we shall be doing a quick tip tactica exploring the concept of combined arms platoon. This is a neat little tactic which I have been using over several editions now, and it has proved to be highly effective in competitive environments. Not only does it make for a powerful play on the table, but it also improves real life logistics such as making your deployment much quicker. So let's not mess around any further. Let's fix bayonets and charge right into today's episode. So the basic idea with this combined arms platoon system is to essentially have your main 2,000 point list consist of a number of smaller self-contained micro armies. Each one of these armies will have enough anti-infantry, anti-tank bodies, armor, and a pinch of artillery to be able to take on any threat in the game. Essentially, you're making a number of take-all-comers lists, which then combine together into making your overall army. If you're a student of history, it's a very similar concept to Napoleon's corps system, where rather than having one big army, Napoleon had multiple smaller armies which he called corps, which then would combine together into one big army, but it meant that he could have one corps attack on the left flank, one corps attack on the right flank, and each corps had its own individual commander with him on top, so that it made his army not only much faster in moving to the battle, which isn't really relevant to 40k, but it made it much more flexible when they actually turned up to the battlefield as well, because if he pushed on the left, he always knew that he'd have cavalry and he'd have infantry and he'd have cannon, and likewise on the right, likewise in the center. So it made his army both flexible on and off the battlefield. Now, of course, a lot, and I mean a lot, of real world tactics have no bearing on Warhammer 40k whatsoever, and trying to implement them often leads to disaster. But this core system, this combined arms platoon, actually does somewhat work on the tabletop. It brings with it a number of advantages. The first one is it can make deployment much more simple, much quicker. If you know, okay, I'm going to have this little bunch of units on the right hand side, and this in the center, and this on the left, you're almost not worrying where your opponent is deploying. You're just making use of the L-shaped ruins in your deployment zone, hiding your high value assets where you can, and you don't worry what your opponent's doing, because you know wherever they put their stuff, whether they focus a little bit more on the left, they focus a little bit more on the right, you know that you have got enough assets with a variety of anti-infantry and anti-tank capabilities where at the very least you should be able to delay them, hold them for a bit until one of your other micro armies can either come along and reinforce the situation, or at the very least just put their firepower over to that flank. Remember, Guard is a shooting army, so we can project force without physically having to move over there, unlike melee armies. And this kind of merges and leads us into the next point, which is not only does it make your deployment a bit easier and a bit quicker, and saving time is always important in a tournament where you can often be pushed for it, but it also can make your opponent's deployment a bit trickier. If they try and spread out to meet you, they'll often find themselves spreading themselves too thin. This is called force concentration, and Guard is one of those funny armies where we can spread out and still often have force concentration. Being a shooting army, like I said, we don't need to move over there to project our force. So the moment someone comes out, if they're exposed, we can get multiple fire angles on them. We're still concentrated whilst being dispersed. If the enemy spreads out too much, then their individual units might have enough anti-infantry, but they won't have enough anti-tank to deal with the armor that you're rolling forward at the same time. So it not only makes your opponent's deployment a bit tricky because they might want to spread out, try and counter you, or if they concentrate everything, it means they're going to end up ceding potentially a whole objective in no man's land to you, and you're not pushing on that objective with like a token 5-man intercessor unit. You're pushing on with a whole goddamn platoon, a combined arms platoon. So that objective is going to be locked down. And speaking of objectives, specifically primary objectives, I feel like the core system, the combined arms platoon, has become only more relevant and more effective as we've gone into 9th and now 10th edition. And this really is because of primary objectives now being fixed in place. They used to be player place, which made things a lot trickier. But now, when you're doing your deployment, again, it's very simple. You just think, right, Alpha Platoon is going to go for the objective on the left. Bravo Platoon is going to go for the objective in the middle. And Charlie Platoon is going to go for the objective over on the right. And once Alpha Platoon has secured the objective, it can then continue on if there's no resistance. If Charlie Platoon starts getting into trouble, well, the Watts from Alpha can come over and help and start firing into that side of the board. It means that when you're setting up, your targets are right in front of you. You know where they are, and they're not going to start messing around, or they're not going to be on your opponent's side of the board. They're going to be in the middle. When I did this in 7th edition, my God, I often had to trek all the way over to the opponent's deployment zone to get to these things because of how the player place objectives could end up working out. Now, I've thrown a lot out there, so let's just bring this together for a moment. The idea behind the Combined Arms Platoon is to have a small force inside your main list that can do a bit of everything, and then you can take multiple of these things to form your overall list, and you deploy them facing off against a primary objective, with their number one goal being to take and secure that objective and do any secondaries that may come up on the tactical cards as they play the game. Once these guys have secured their main primary, they can use their firepower to project their force over to support one of the other micro armies, one of the other platoons who may not be faring as well. It gives you an advantage in your deployment, and it can make your opponent's life a bit difficult when they're not sure if they should spread out or try and concentrate. Now, all of this is well and good talking about in theory, but let's get down to the nitty-gritty. What is a good example of a list that makes use of Combined Arms Platoons? Well, I actually ran one recently when I went to a tournament. Depending on when this video comes out, now all of that sounds great in theory, but let's get to reality and dive into the nitty-gritty. I want to give you an example of a list that I ran that used Combined Arms Platoons. I recently went to a tournament where I took Vanquisher spam, Leman Russ Vanquishers, and in theory this shouldn't have been a very good list, because Vanquishers, even though they're cheap, they kind of are very specialist, and you know, if someone's got a 4 vulnerable save, they're going to struggle. But I built my army around the idea of Combined Arms Platoons to try and turn the Vanquisher's weaknesses into a big advantage. But what I ended up doing with my list, and by the way, if you want to see how this list does, there will be an after action report coming out. It should be this weekend at the time of recording this video. So you will get to watch this video, and then a few days later, you'll be able to see the after action report. But going back to the list, I took in each one of my Combined Arms Platoon a Leman Russ Vanquisher, a Hellhound, and then a blob of infantry. Now, the infantry almost didn't matter. I had some Catachans, I had some Cadians, but what I had in that little force was 2 armored targets, a main tank with all the anti-tanks. So I've got the Vanquisher Cannon, the Las Cannon, I've got a Hunter Killer in there, I've got Plasma Cannons on the side, and then I also had a Hellhound, which is obviously bringing a lot of anti-infantry with its Heavy Flamer, its Inferno Cannon. I even had a bit of supplementary anti-tank on there with an extra Hunter Killer missile. And then I had the bodies, the screening and the stuff that could move on objectives with intense objective control, and that was the infantry. And each time these infantry would have access to at least one order, but either by the commander that was leading them or from a Master Vox and platoon command squad that was behind the lines. And so this force doesn't sound like much on its own, right? Couple of tanks and 20 guard infantry, not much to write home about individually, but I took this 3 times. So now we're not looking at a couple of tanks and 20 infantry. We're looking at 6 tanks and 20 infantry, all of which is moving forward aggressively onto each primary objective. So my opponent individually might be able to overwhelm one of those platoons, but if he spreads out to meet my platoons, he's got to take that on with a fraction of his force. And these little Combined Arms Platoons that I took weren't even the only part of my army. I then actually had 2 specialized platoons behind. I had a Supreme Command Blob, which was my Lord Solar with Catachans and a platoon command squad, and that allowed me to project orders out 24 inches to my Lemurus Vanquishers. And then I also had a Creed command blob, which was, I actually took 20 infantry because I wanted a few extra bodies, and then I had Creed. It sat next to 3 mortar teams, 3 mortar heavy weapons squad, so 9 mortars in total, I should say. And this is something that's really important to remember when we're talking about the combined arms platoons. They're not exclusionary. It's not one or the other. It's not specialists or combined arms. You can combine these things together. So if you take a look at this list, I was actually bringing together 3 of the tactics that I commonly like to use. I had my combined arms platoons, pushing forward and focusing on primary. I had my Creed command blob with mortar pit, and then I also had my Supreme command blob. So there were in total about 5 platoons, 5 corps working together in this. There's 5 little micro armies or crunchy combos, and individually they came together and made a very, very potent force. I don't want to give any spoilers away, but this army went into 3 very, very difficult matchups and performed, shall we say, adequately. To understate it a little bit, performed adequately each time. And I kid you not, no word of lie, each one of my opponents, unprompted, without talking to each other, said the same thing to me after each game. They said, wow, there was just so much coming at me from every angle. Like, I could deal with one bit at a time, but I wasn't allowed to deal with one bit at a time because I was getting hit by all of it at the same time, no matter where I moved. And I am obviously adding a few words in, that's not their exact words, but you get the point. That was the sentiment. And I'm not just making this up to prove my point or anything. Hand on heart, from my lips to God's ears, that was the sentiment that every single one of my opponents came away with from that game. And it was because of using this combined arms tactic, these micro armies which allow me to have great force concentration and combat width at the same time. What's kind of funny with this combined arms thing is when you start doing it in the Guard, I find myself applying the same techniques to other armies as well. And we've discussed this a little bit on some of the Morning Glory live streams, where it's like you start guardifying other things. So when I look at my Tyranids now, sometimes I run the full meme list of, the 240 unending swarm. What I often like to do is take a unit of termagants, combine that with a Tervigon, and then add a fire support bug in there. And so when I push onto objective, I've got screening and I've got 2 big bugs there. And I'll do that like 2 or 3 times across the army, and then add a few specialists in for like secondaries and or for support and stuff like that. So you start doing it with other armies, and I have to say, this definitely isn't just a tactic that you do with just the Guard. It can translate, cross-pollination, it can work with other factions. And I almost find myself doing it accidentally because it's sort of a natural way for me to approach building armies out, because over many years of using it, like I said, I have found it to be quite effective. Well, at least that's what I think. But of course, all of this is just like my opinion, man. Let me know what you think down in the comment section below. Have you tried using these combined arms things? Did you find them effective? Or do you prefer, or does your faction prefer, you running a much more specialized approach? If you enjoyed today's video, don't forget to smash that like button and also subscribe to never miss an episode. Would you like to know more? If so, then please consider becoming a channel member or patron. By supporting the channel, not only will you be doing your part, but you'll also be helping me create more content for your viewing pleasure and unlocking a whole host of perks. You get everything from a badge next to your name, custom emojis, but the big one is access to the Mordian Glory Discord server, an online community with almost 2,500 active members. It's always popping off in the MG Discord. We've got channels for army lists, hobbying, tactics, stories, and even a pretty spicy meme section as well. For all you greenhorns that wanted to see the Mordian Glory Hole, today is your lucky day. And joking aside, I do want to say a massive thank you to all of the current channel members and Patreons. You guys are amazing. Truly the lifeblood of the channel. I could not do Mordy and Glory full-time without the incredible and generous support of my members. So thank you guys so much. And last but certainly not least, I want to say a personal thank you to all of my top tier Patreons. These are the War Masters, the people who have truly gone above and beyond the call of duty. So a heartfelt thank you to Alex Dengal, Bon Bon Vert, Mad Larkin, Marcus Roberts, Mark Panconi, RJ Scorpion, Swordfish Trombone, Try Again Bragg, John Stubbs, Nick Wolf, Diesel Fox, and August Barney. Seriously guys, thank you from the bottom of my heart. Your support is incredible and it makes a huge difference. Thank you so much. That's all for now. Hope you've all enjoyed today's video, and of course, as always, see you guys next time.